So coming to the concluding paper of mine for this evening. See, as devotees of Bhagavad Pada and also as academicians in the pursuit of truth, it behoves us to admit the lacunae in the sources of information that are available on the life of Acharya, especially the Shankara Vijayas. Since the authors themselves acknowledge that they don't have any first-hand information, Vyasacharya very boldly says, Aitihyamashranti vadanti chaivam tareva mudam mama bhashanepi yavat kritam tavadehasya karatur vachyam tadhasyad dvigunam pravaktuhu. So Aitihya or oral tradition is the source of what I speak. And it is quite natural that what is heard becomes double when it is said. So the exaggerations and all are quite natural in these Shankara Vijayas. And we know the major sources of information are about the 17 or 18 works. In fact, the list goes beyond 18 because there are Shankara Vijayas which are composed even today. About 2 years back, there was a Shankarayana composed by a poet from West Bengal. So biographies of Shankaracharya continue to be composed in various parts. In fact, no one earlier had mentioned that Shankaracharya was a Nambudiri, but this scholar from West Bengal has very clearly said that Shankara Bhagavad Pada was a Nambudiri. So these Shankara Vijayas are there, and there are some Puranic works also, like Markandeya Samhita, Shiva Rahasya, etc. And there are some other kavyas like Patanjali Charita which have some information on Bhagavad Pada Acharya. And Anuktam Anyato Grahyam. So we generally collate information from here and there since we don't have enough information. But whatever we know is only a hypothesis. We do not have any first-hand or completely reliable accounts on the life of Bhagavad Pada. So while speaking on this topic, it is necessary that we, all of us bear in our minds that the incredible accounts in the biographies and the factual inaccuracies encountered in these works are a result of the reverence of these poets. It's purely an expression of their reverence towards Bhagavad Pada, and they do not deserve to be condemned for their historical misrepresentation, etc. It is their reverence. On the other hand, as academicians, our reverence towards Bhagavad Pada lies in our admission of the lacunae in the sources of information and the rejection of all incredible and unreliable accounts. So while speaking on this topic, we must all remember the great words of Bhartrihari, Nindantu niti nipuna yadivastuvantu nyayat patha pravichadanti padam nadhiraha. So regardless of acclaims or criticism, we must not go astray from the determined path of our pursuit towards truth. Kalpadau dvisahasrante lokanugraha kamyaya chaturbhi sahashishyastu Shankara avatarishyati. This particular verse is from the Bhavishya Purana. That is, in the beginning of Kali Yuga, after the passage of 2000 years of Kali Yuga, Bhagavad Pada will incarnate, Shiva will incarnate as Bhagavad Pada with 4 disciples. Shankaracharya and 4 disciples is almost very, very firmly established in all our minds. The beautiful paintings also always represent Shankaracharya with the 4 disciples. But we come across a number of inconsistencies as far as the disciples of Shankaracharya are concerned. Anantanandagiri and Chidvidas are referred to. Apart from the 4 well-known disciples, Sureshwaracharya, Padmapadacharya, Hastamadakacharya, Totakacharya. Anantanandagiri and Chidvidasa give list of names such as Jnanakanda, Vishnugupta, Shuddha Kirti, Bhanumarichi, Krishna Darshana, Buddha Vriddhi, Virinchipada, Shuddhanantanandagiri, Vidyanidhi, and Chidvidasa. In addition to this, Tripura Kumara, Divakara, Girija Kumara, Lakshmana, Hastamadaka. Hastamadaka, of course, we have already discussed. These disciples are considered as the disciples who were interested with the task of re-establishing the Shanmathas. Now this Bhanumarichi, Shuddhakirti, all these disciples, we do not know any work attributed to them, nor we come across these names in any other Shankara Vijayas. Now, in the Sri Vidyarnava Tantra, which is attributed to Vidyaranya, again it is unlikely since the work refers to King Praudhadeva of the 15th century, who wrote after the period of Vidyaranya. It is unlikely that the work was composed by Vidyaranya. Could be a disciple or some follower of Vidyaranya, someone in the tradition of Vidyaranya. There 14 disciples of the Acharya are mentioned. The disciples included 5 monks and 9 grihasthas. The monks were Padmapada, Bodha, Girvana, Anandatirtha and another Shankara. Shankara the Guru also had Shankara the disciple. Apart from these, there were 9 grihasthas who were Sundara, Vishnu Sharma, Lakshmana, Mallikarjuna, Trivikrama, Sridhara, Kaparadi, Keshava and Damodara. Now what is the most interesting thing here is that the list of sannyasi disciples includes only Padmapada and all the other names are excluded. So all these things, they force us to reconsider on the contemporaneity of the 4 disciples and Shankaracharya. This point is highlighted by the great scholar Sri Dr. S. Shankara Narayana Shastri in his Shankara and his disciples. So inspired by that, we'll just survey on the views about the other disciples. Firstly, coming to Sureshwaracharya, as we were discussing a while ago, some biographies they identify Sureshwaracharya's Purvashrama, that is Vishwarupa with Mandana and Umbeka. And his wife is called as Amba or Sarasavani or Bharatiya, etc. Now, before we see whether Sureshwara was a contemporary or no, let us first disambiguate who this Sureshwara was. Were Vishwarupa and Mandana one and the same? No. It is very, very clear that the two were distinct. What Mahadevendra says and what a few other works say are unreliable. They are fictitious accounts. It is made very, very clear by Vyasacharya, who refers to both the names as 2 different individuals. One who was defeated by Bhagavad-pada in the debate and one who receives Upadesha from Bhagavad-pada-charya immediately after the immolation of Kumari the Bhatta. So the two are different there. Apart from that, it may be noted that that is Sureshwaracharya in his works has been critical of Mandana Mishra. Mandana Mishra has been even referred to as Pandita Mani, as a self-proclaimed scholar. So Sureshwara would not abuse his own work, review his own work. It is completely unacceptable that Sureshwara and Mandana were one. We will come to Mandana later, and now let us see Vishwarupa. Who is this Vishwarupa? Now, one of the Vishwarupa that we know is a commentator on the Yajnavalkya Smriti. He had written a commentary called Balakrida on the Yajnavalkya Smriti. Why this conjuncture arises is because one of the commentators on this Balakrida, he refers to Bhavabhuti Sureshakyam Vishwarupam Namamyaham. That is, he identifies all the 3 characters. Now, Bhavabhuti, the well-known poet, he was also called as a well-known dramatist, he was also known as Umveka. So this Umveka was Bhavabhuti, is almost established. R.D. Karmarkar and other scholars have very clearly established that Umveka was none other than Bhavabhuti, and Kuppaswamy Shastri and others also have accepted this theory. But identifying all the 3 is done in one of the works, in one of the commentaries on Yajnavalkya Smriti. where all the three are identified. Now, how to distinguish this? It is through the fact that on the topic of the right of Dvijas to embrace sannyasa, there is a difference in the view presented by Sureshwaracharya and Vishwarupa. Sureshwaracharya held the view that Dvija refers to Brahmins. Dvija refers to all the three Varnas. Brahmana, Kshatriya and Vaishya, all the three had the right to embrace sannyasa. He says this in his Brihadaranyaka Bhashya, Brihadaranyaka Vartika. On the other hand, Vishwarupa in his Badakrida very categorically states that the word Dvija should be exclusively applied to the Brahmana and not to the other two Dvija Varnas. So on the same topic, Vishwarupa and Sureshwara have different views. So accepting Vishwarupa and Sureshwara as one is also questionable. But still, accepting Vishwarupa, a commentator on Yajnavalkya Smriti with Sureshwaracharya is unlikely. Possibly he was known by the name Vishwarupa, another Vishwarupa, because someone as great as Vidya Narainswamy also refers to him as Vishwarupacharya in a couple of places. And now let us see the internal works of Sureshwaracharya. In his Taitiriya Bhashya Vartika, he says, Taitiriya Kasarasya Vartikamritam Uttamam Maskarinda Pranitasya Bhashyasya etad vivechanam Mumukshu Sarthavahasya Bhavanama Bhrato Yatihi Yatehe Shishyaschakara Tadbhaktya Sureshakyo Maharthavit. He says, the disciple of a yati, disciple of a sannyasi named Bhava has composed the Bhashya, has composed the Vartika on the Bhashya on Taittiriya Upanishad. Now, some argue that the use of the name Bhava is an indirect reference to the name Shankara, because na guru namagrhniyat is an injunction. Keeping that in mind, but it is unlikely because he refers to Shankara Bhagavad-pada as Shankara in his other works or in other verses. Yat prajnodadhi Yat prajnodadhi yukti shabdanakhaja shraddhaika sannaikada sthairya stambha mumukshu dukkhita kripa yatnotha bodhamritam pitva janma mriti pravaha vidhura moksham yayur mokshinah tam vande trikuda prasutam amalam vedhobhidam madgurum. Here, in this particular verse, he refers to his guru. Earlier, he named that his guru was a yati called Bhava, yati who bore the name Bhava. Here, he says that his guru was named Vedas or Vedha. And this guru Veda belonged to the Atri Gotra. So, in both the cases, there is no indication towards Shankaracharya being his actual guru. Then coming to the Brihadaranyaka Vartika, he says, Yam Kandvo Punishat Chadena Sakalam Nayartha Samshodhinim Sanchakrur Guravon Ravutta Guroha Vrittim Satam Shantaye Artha Vishkaranam Kutarkika Krita Shanka Samutthitaye Tasya Nyaya Samashritena Vachasa Prakramyate Deshatah. That is, he says that this Vartika is being composed only to refute all the criticisms or all the misinterpretations of the pristine philosophy of Bhagavad-pada Acharya, which were done by all perverted people. That is, he says, kutarkika or false logicians, all the misinterpretations of the pristine philosophy which was undertaken by false logicians. In order to refute those, this Vartika is being composed, which implies that between the time when the Bhashya was composed and when the time this Vartika was composed, some generations of critics of Bhagavad-pada must have lived. And this is made further clear in the next metaphorical verse from the Brihadaranyaka Vartika, where reference is made to the well-known critic of Shankara Bhagavad named Bhaskara. He says, Shailad Udayat Tathastagirito Bhaswad Yesho Rashmibhi Vyaptam Vishwam Anandhakaram Abhavat Yasyasma Shishyeridam Arad Jnana Gabhastibhi Pratihatas Chandrayate Bhaskara Tasmai Shankara Bhanave Tanumano Vagbhir Namastyat Sada. At the end, he says that I offer my salutations to the sun in the form of Shankara Bhagavad. Now, if Bhagavad is the sun, Bhaskara, the real sun, becomes faded like the moon. Even the sun appears to be dull like the moon in the presence of the sun named Shankara Bhagavad. So here, this must be taken in the light of the fact that Bhaskara here refers to the critic of Bhagavad. And the date of Bhaskara, we know, is somewhere as late as the 8th century. As late as the 7th century. And another reason that supports this conjecture is that Vachaspati Mishra, who is said to be a very, very ardent follower of the Mandana Prasthana and who established his own Bhamati Prasthana, although he refers to Padmapada on a couple of occasions, he does not make any reference to Sureshwaracharya. It is absurd that someone like the Bhamatikara would conveniently forget the name of Sureshwaracharya if he had ever lived before him. So all these indicate that Sureshwaracharya must have lived at least 2 or 3 centuries after Shankara Bhagavad. He must have been possibly a contemporary of Vachaspati Mishra. Coming to Padmapadacharya. Can we accept Padmapadacharya as a direct disciple? That also is a bit questionable. Because he too says that amongst his disciples, one of the verses he says that Yadvaktra Manasa Sarah Pratidabdha Janma Bhashya Ravinda Makaranda Rasam Pibanti Pratyasham Unmukha Vinita Vinaya Bhrangan Tan Bhashya Vittaka Gurun Pranatosmi Murdhana. So Padmapadacharya says that I offer my salutations to all the gurus who know the Bhashya. Tan Bhashya Vittaka Gurun Pranamami Murdhana. Bhashya Vittaka means the experts in the exposition of the Bhashya. In the Advaita Parampara, the only known Bhashyakara is Shankara Bhagavad. So Bhashya Vittaka Gurun, it very, very clearly implies that there have been some gurus who lived before Padmapadacharya who were exponents of the Shankara Bhashya. So this particular verse is also an indication of the fact that he offers his salutations to the gurus who lived before him and who taught this Shankara Bhashya. So this was, and as far as the date of Padmapadacharya is concerned, since Vachaspati Mishra makes reference to Padmapadacharya, we may assume that Padmapadacharya possibly lived about a century after Shankara Bhagavad. At least 2 or 3 generations of gurus might have passed before them. And my last thing is about the Sarvagnya Pitha. While there are biographies which have counter views, while there are counter views on where this Sarvagnya Pitha was located, whether it was Kashmir or Kanchi, if we refer to the original works of Bhagavad, he says, Bhagavatvam Sarvajñatvam in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya. That is, Sarvajñatvam means the godness. It is only the God who is the creator of the whole universe can be called as Sarvajña. Again, he is critical of the followers of Sankhya and Nyaya for calling their respective founders as Sarvajña. So under these circumstances, it is very, very unlikely that Shankara Bhagavad would have even accepted to be called as Sarvajña, for leave alone going and sitting a throne whereby he would be called as Sarvajña. So that is again something totally a creation of our biographers only to elevate the personality of Shankara Bhagavad-pada. He being Shivavatara is Sarvagnya. There is no need to say that, but still out of their genuine reverence they have done this. And about Shanmata I wanted to speak, but Dr. Murday has already mentioned that. See, equally important is that we also need to revisit the Bhagavad-pada's contribution towards the institution of the 10 order of monks, Dashanama Sampradaya, and founding of mathas. 4 mathas, 5 mathas, all these debates may go on, but Bhagavad-pada himself does not indicate in any of his work about any matha. He in fact, in his Shiva Aparadha Kshamapana Stotram says, Paurohitnyam Rajani Charitam Gramanitvam Niyogo Matha Patyam Hyanradavachanam Sakshivadaha Parannam Brahmadvesha Khalajanaratihi Praninam Nirdayatvam Mabhudevam Mama Pashupate Janma Janmantareshu. That is, he says that, may in any birth of mine I not seek some evils like hating Brahmins, Brahmadvesha, or Khalajanarati, or affinity towards evil people, or speak lies, or seek to become the head of a monastery, or to seek to become a Mathadipati. So this is the view of Shankara Bhagavad-pada as far as presiding over a monastery is concerned. Now, if Shankaracharya says so, Vidyaranya reiterates the same. In his Jivan Mukti Viveka he says, Ataeva bhikshuhu aniketa sthitireva tadanim tasmin mamatve sati tadiya hanivriddhyoho chittam vikshipet. He says that a monk must not have a dwelling place of his own. If he has a matha, etc., then that would only lead to his attachment towards that particular matha. Yatha mathona parigrihniyat. One must not have a matha. This is the view of Vidyaranya Swami, which is nothing but a reiteration of what Shankara Bhagavad-pada says. There are many more such loose ends which need to be resolved. As many of the scholars who spoke before me mentioned, we need a multi-pronged approach. Epigraphy, literature alone won't suffice. Collective and multi-pronged approach might help us. But most important, I would say, though the workshop is for the historiography of Bhagavad-pada Acharya, it is the philosophy of Bhagavad-pada Acharya and his contribution to the protection of Sanatana Dharma and preservation of Sanatana Dharma that we are thinking of having a workshop on his historiography. So we must celebrate his great contributions to the Sanatana Dharma, and there is no doubt that the reverence that Bhagavan Vedavyasa deserves from every Sanatani, the same is also to be accorded to Bhagavad-pada Acharya. With these words, I take your leave. Namaskaram. Thank you.